Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. It's been one day for you guys, but it's been 2 weeks for me. So we are in the new house now, the new digs. Really enjoying it. I gotta say my drawing area has about quadrupled in size compared to what I had before in the apartment back in the city. Which was, I was very grateful to have that space, but it was pretty small and restrained. But again, considering where I lived in the city, in an apartment, already that you would have a space like that was pretty darn great. But now the space has enlarged, and maybe so has my voice, because I do feel like right now, basically my drawing space is kind of a section in the garage that's almost closed off. There's still a section of wall and door that we have to install to kind of shut it off from the rest of the garage. So I'm not exactly sure how my voice is going to turn out. I feel like it's going to be a little bit echoey, at least for now. But hey, bear with me. I'm working on it. We're not fully settled in yet. And that's the reason why you probably don't recognize in any way the comic that's in front of you for a Wednesday, right? It is usually Dale Keown Day. Here's what I've decided, just because of the move. As you know, guys, if you've got a comic collection, when you do move, you tend to have a chance to just reorganize stuff and clean up and archive everything properly. And doing that, I came across some interesting comics, mostly one-offs, that I'm going to go through this week that I just haven't seen in a while, and they kind of popped back into my piles when I was organizing, and I was like, oh man, these would actually be fun to do a review with. Just to get me started, ease my way back into it, I figured that I'd just kind of go with Wildcard Week. So that's what's going to be happening this week. We'll call it Wildcard Week instead of just Wildcard Sunday. Every day, every video is going to be a wildcard, kind of random comic out of nowhere. And your regularly scheduled videos and artists will be coming back the week after, except for Rob Liefeld, because I've gone through everything else I have since the move. Rob Liefeld stuff or extreme stuff, Liefeld adjacent. I've gone through it. No actual artwork. I would have even covered a few of the books if he'd done a few pages in them, but I literally just don't have any more Rob Liefeld material. Eventually, though, I hope I'll be getting to that retrospective on Rob Liefeld and his art style and his inspirations and influences that I'm going to slowly start working on. I've talked about it before, that I would start working on it once I got to the new house. So once we're really settled in, everything's kind of, fully kind of up and running here in the home, I'm going to get to work on that, hopefully to be able to release that in the summer, kind of an in-depth thing. So a longer video, different format, so that one's going to take a little more time to put together and edit. But okay, anyways, enough about what's coming up. Let's talk about today. So it is Doomsday+1 is what it's called. So by Modern Comics, which I've never heard of. Kind of murky if this was published in 1977 or 1975. I'm not 100% sure, but if you know about John Byrne, you probably recognize the style here. So what's interesting about looking at this issue is, I just had no idea John Byrne had done this stuff, had been published before working for Marvel and DC in the 70s. I know he had been, but for smaller companies and stuff, I never heard of Modern Comics. So came across this probably in a dollar bin or something. I'm not even sure. And it's been kind of following me around all these years. And I thought it'd be a good idea to take a look at it. What it is basically a very early on John Byrne. So my two general comments as I've gone through the book, and we're going to go through it together, is he's already pretty much got his compositional skills down on this one, but there's still just some little rough edges and still somewhat amateurish drawings here and there. Not very, because he's already pretty darn solid in this issue, but I'll point those out as we go along. But anyone who's familiar with John Byrne will most definitely recognize the style. It's already pretty much kind of established. What's different, like I said, is those amateurish bits and the inking, because it says art by John Byrne, so I assume he inked himself. He may have had some help. As I read the credits, I'll point out what I mean there. But yeah, so just rough around the edges on the inking as well, right? Not quite the level of professional inking that we're going to get just a few years later when he works for Marvel. I do know that originally he was being inked by other inkers, which probably helped, and eventually John Byrne started inking himself. I'm not sure if it was on Fantastic Four, but somewhere in the 80s there, maybe on Man of Steel. And that was kind of his, fully formed style there, where he was very popular in the mid 80s. A little bit after X-Men and during his Man of Steel run and Superman run. Anyways, enough about that. Let's look at Doomsday+1. So already on the cover, you can see some old school kind of techniques at work here. So I'm pretty sure he's using a lot of like old school markers and stuff for the coloring. And I assume John Byrne is doing the coloring on this as well. Got kind of a monochromatic thing going here, oranges and reds, which I think look pretty cool and work pretty well. He's gone with the old complementary colors, blue and orange, to attract the male gaze. And I think it works pretty well here on this cover with the black negative space surrounding it. Obviously, they're in the crosshairs of some sort of, I guess what I would call some sort of futuristic gun or sci-fi gun or superhero gun. Guess we'll find out within this issue, maybe. So right away, the things you'll notice again is the composition all around, the angles of the panels and things like that all throughout the comic are pretty much John Byrne. This is a John Byrne, the John Byrne that we know. This is a John Byrne profile, you know, the way he draws musculature, some of the kind of hatching he does, right? But I think it might have something to do with the printing a little bit. It feels like the ink is just a little bit like muddled, right, on the page, on the printed page. So I feel like the original art is probably a lot sharper. But still, as you look at some of the stuff, you can see that, you know, these lines will become a little more kind of confident in later John Byrne art that we'll see in the 80s, right? Like this shot of a rocket, I'm sure he's done 1,000 times, but maybe not at this point, right? So still kind of working out the kinks throughout these issues, or this issue, excuse me. This character here, you know, even the foreshortening, you'll see here and there, some of the foreshortening I feel is just a bit off, where with John Byrne, usually with what I'm used to seeing from him, it is not. So, you know, not horrible, still works really well, but you can see there's still an amateurish kind of aspect to some of the stuff. The hand in this case here, not quite as solid as what we'll come to expect from John Byrne. But again, like all the layouts, it says, we'll talk about the credits. Editing, George. That's funny that the editor is the first guy. Never mind that. Story, Joe Gill. Art, Byrne Robotics, I guess is what he was calling himself back then, with technical assistance from Patterson. And this was done in 1975. So I don't know if Patterson was helping him ink. Maybe some of these background buildings that look typically, the inking might look a little bit different from the foreground figures and stuff. Or if he was helping out with like the planes at this point. I know John Byrne, again, later on the X-Men and Superman, anytime he's got to draw planes, I think he's got like he's kind of a plane enthusiast and hobbyist, so he draws them really well. And already this is pretty good, but there's a few kind of perspective faux pas here in this ship that I'm not going to, you know, logically the way he's done this wing is just a little bit narrower kind of here than it is on this side. But I mean, overall, as you're reading the story, it's not anything that's going to affect your enjoyment of the story. So again, you're just going to notice that the finish on top of his compositions is just still not quite a professional level. Pretty darn close though. And again, John Byrne, very adept at doing those slashing horizon angles, and he's doing it all over the pages here, except for maybe on this shot here, which is why sometimes I think maybe this Patterson guy did something like this, because this feels a little boring maybe for John Byrne generally, right? Just kind of a head-on shot with the horizon there. He rarely does that when there's action going on. So even here with, you know, the continuation in the action from the last page, he's using that tilted horizon and obviously leading us in the direction that he wants, right? So again, the composition and the layouts and stuff, you know, already he's got that down to where he's directing your eye where it should go. Like everything's always angled in the reading direction. This way here to this guy looking down here, you hit this guy, you kind of follow, you know, the whatever this guy, the monitoring station, I guess, that he's standing at, and then brings you to the last panel. Again, pointing out, you know, early John Byrne here. Some of the, you know, the folds on the jackets work, but I think he, you know, he definitely gets better at that. Better than what he's showing in his skill level here. But these two characters to me are just kind of, I guess I'd describe them as wobbly and funky, like almost cartoonier than the other characters. I don't know if that's done on purpose or if that's, again, just Byrne still being at a slightly amateur level. But there's just something I like about them where I'd like to see all the characters depicted this way, even though, you know, our heroic characters are portrayed more in the typical John Byrne way and mold. He's shown off some of his background elements that he's going to use a lot throughout his career. This design pattern here, I guess, denotes the lights. It is the 70s, right? I know here in Montreal, or in the city rather, not here, because obviously I moved out, but back in the city of Montreal, when you go to the metro and stuff, the underground subway, a lot of these types of lights are present. That's like late 60s, early 70s. So that must have been, I guess, something that was pretty prominent everywhere. Maybe office buildings and stuff. So I'm not going to bog you down with the story or anything like that, because it's just a random issue of the series, number 5. You know, not that anything truly stands out with it, but it's again, the reason we're looking at this is the art. Weird choice to have it be completely kind of turned on its side here, where the panel is probably meant to be looked at vertically and not horizontally. So I'm not quite sure that works in and of itself, but the panel itself is actually pretty darn good. Maybe it's a bit of the 2001 influence at this point. I don't know. But the detailing inside the ship is pretty cool. Kind of gives us a preview of later stuff we'll see with the X-Men and the Blackbird ship, their jet, right? Just maybe more detailed, obviously, at that point. Here it just feels very basic and slightly kind of psychedelic, but it's the 70s, so I guess that kind of works. But again, the interest here is to look at some, you know, pre-professional John Byrne art, right? And you can see moments where, see, that feels kind of rushed, right? To a certain extent. It doesn't really look like John Byrne. Feels like maybe he swiped this from someone like John Buscema or something. Maybe. I'm just guessing. I could be completely wrong. You know, the face on this character here isn't worked over very well. What's good is always, again, the angles. He's always very adept at doing these crazy angles all throughout. This guy's face, he just reminds me of one of the boxers in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, the old Nintendo game. And again, you know, even the action sequences, the fight sequences feel pretty much like John Byrne, but the level of drawing is just much more simplistic in those sequences than what we get later. But, you know, the kind of, you know, model male character that he draws throughout with this guy is pretty darn close to the John Byrne you know, Superman model, Cyclops, or whatever that he uses later. This character too here, this kind of facial construction with the short nose and the wide space between the nose and the top lip is something I've seen John Byrne use a lot. Another, you know, that down angle, looking down on the character here. Tilted horizon line, down shots. John Byrne's adept at that as well. I've always mentioned how I respect artists who can do really good down shots, because I do find them difficult. And yeah, there's just, again, when we get to these secondary characters, these kind of villain guys, it's just something, it gets cartoonier, almost like with these two here. I almost feel like there's almost a manga influence in a weird way, like manga from the 60s and 70s. I mean, had John Byrne seen some of that at this point? Probably. I would venture to say that when you're in the comic book business at that time, even though that stuff wasn't really available to comic book collectors generally in North America, I'm sure it was available to the professionals, right? Frank Miller's talked about, you know, seeing Lone Wolf and Cub in the late 70s and stuff like that, right? Which influenced a lot of his art later on, a bit in Daredevil and then with Ronin. So I get a little bit of that here, like that quickly drawn. If you guys have ever seen Tiger Mask, I think it's called, one of the Tiger Mask series has this kind of like quick inking, and I think it looks very cool and dynamic. Certainly works for animation. Like I said, here it feels just slightly rushed. And I kind of really noticed the colors when I got to this page originally as I was going through it, and I do kind of like the colors throughout. I don't know how they're getting these printed. You've got this kind of interesting pattern here if you look closely. A bunch of little like circles and X's and stuff. So probably not the same printing presses as you know, other comics of the day. I don't know, maybe they use different patterns. It does make the colors look a little bit different. And again, we're pretty much blue and orange all the way through. And, you know, I do think those colors tend to work generally, unless you're really bad at coloring. Contrasts are nice. So here's another thing where, okay, a little bit of amateur stuff from John Byrne on this one here. So the foreshortening itself is okay, but, you know, clearly he got better at it. And this weird little tangent of, you know, the gun here on the ground in the foreground and his knee in foreshortened form, you know, way in the background, kind of touching there right on the top. That's kind of a no-no. Because, again, that's what kind of seems to create confusion here, where you're like, well, it looks like his leg's at the same level as this gun here. So his hands are reaching to the gun. So it creates, yeah, it kind of flattens the character, basically, is what I'm trying to say. even though the foreshortening could work if not for this tangent here. So, you know, how do you fix that? Well, you move the knee up just a little bit so there's a bit of that background negative space between the gun and the knee here. That would have been probably the best solution here to separate them properly. But again, these are mistakes that John Byrne would not be making much after this. See, here's another one where the foreshortening looks a little, I don't want to even say off, just very exaggerated, where I feel like, you know, eventually John Byrne reins that in a bit and his style becomes a little more solidly realistic to a certain point where everything kind of works, right? We still get some early kind of fun wonkiness, right? I always like anyways, seeing a bit of wonkiness from early art from artists. Some of them keep that wonkiness. Some of them just get better as draftsmen as it goes along. The wonkiness kind of goes away. So it is nice to see that everyone always has a little bit of that here. You know, if he's hoisted above this character's head, this arm here is like super long to be foreshortened at that point and the hand be that big. But it's still kind of, I mean, visually it works, right? You don't question it too much as you're reading it. It's only when you stop and kind of look at it. I thought this was funny. The magic power of witchcraft. These interesting 70s ads, in comics. And I mean, I've seen this sequence in the X-Men, right? These kind of down shots on ships and missiles and stuff is, I would say, definitely something that is a trope of John Byrne's, this kind of angle on a ship. I've seen it in many issues, either of X-Men or Superman that he's done. Good choice here to make it a silhouette, right? As opposed to the very bright kind of colorful background. Great. Only thing that kind of sucks is the wing here, you know, going out of the frame. That's another little kind of amateurish thing that you would, you know, just move the ship over really to make sure the tip is within the shot here. Or if you really want to get crazy, have it go outside of the panel. But I don't think John Byrne and comics were doing that back in these days in the mid 70s. But have it go out and overlap the panel so that it's, you know, it gives us a sense of it being even closer to us and moving faster and further away from the explosion. But other than that, that's a great shot. Just fix that wingtip. That would have been too complicated. And again, very, very reminiscent of, you know, shots of spaceships and cosmic adventures that John Byrne would draw later on in his career. So again, not John Byrne on these two pages. So what was the interest of this? Well, again, just to see a little bit of early John Byrne, still kind of making mistakes and drawing wonky stuff, which is fun in and of itself. But we could see like the potential, obviously, and where it was going and where it actually got to once John Byrne became a professional, started working for Marvel and DC. Everything kind of really coalesced. But it's fun to see the beginnings of him building his style in this comic here. So there you go, guys. That is my review of Doomsday+1. Little rough start for the first one, I think, personally. But anyways, I'll get back into the groove of things, and hopefully the next videos will be a little bit better. If you are subscribed and you are still watching, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support. Please hang in there with me. We're almost up to 500 subscribers. So once we do that, YouTube actually considers us a real channel and starts helping us out a little bit in getting us out there to other people who are interested in comics, just like you are, people out there who are watching. If you're watching and you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a second for you, and it really helps the channel, helps us grow, helps get us out there once again to other people who are interested in the same thing as we are, namely comic books. So everyone out there, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.